Welcome to the first installment of a series that I'm going to be calling Sailor Moon Studies. As the title suggests, I'm going to be doing a rather comprehensive dive into the almost 30-year-old franchise, complete with analysis on the primary source material of the manga, as well as the anime. I will be going over both as completely separate entities. There's enough different story beats and changes to make this distinction completely necessary. While I won't be going in entirely chronological order, as switching back and forth would ruin any sense of consistency, which for an analysis is kind of a necessity, I'll be covering the manga first and then the anime on an arc-to-arc basis, barring any major developments at the time. I will also be judging every arc as a self-contained experience, as in I won't let the manga adaptation of events influence how I view the manga's arc. As such, I won't be letting later additions, such as the Outer Senshi, influence my thoughts on the Black Moon arc, for example. Imagine this series as an attempt to re-experience the series through a more critical eye. With that little bit of introduction over, let's get into the review proper. This video is going to be going over Act 1, from Bishoujo Senshi Sailor Moon, or as it's far easier for me to pronounce, Pretty Soldier Sailor Moon, created by Naoko Takeuchi. While not a household name or prestigious mangaka at the time, she had a few successful one-shots and runs within Nakayoshi magazine. The premise for this new story was simple. Create a series similar to Go Ranger, but involve a group of beautiful girls in outer space. Thus, the blend of the magic girl genre and the Super Sentai genre found its way into the pages of Nakayoshi magazine in February of 1992. Coincidentally, for the purpose of analysis, I decided to use as much of the original Nakayoshi run for Sailor Moon as I can. For those of you completely unfamiliar with the manga series, there are, as of the time of recording this video, 4 different printings of the series, each with slight alterations made by the mangaka herself. There's the original Nakayoshi magazine run, published in February of 1992, the original Tankobon, the remastered Shinshoban from 2003, and the most recent incarnation, the Perfect Kanzenban, from 2014. And while it could be argued that since Naoko made these changes, they are intended and they should be the proper way to experience the manga, but sometimes this really isn't the case. The original Tankobon is perhaps the most well-recognized incarnation of the series, but lacks several key visuals and, most importantly, color. This decision isn't very pragmatic on my part. After all, the original run has never had any reprints, and it's hardly circulated. But thanks to the efforts of Misdream.org, you too can read Sailor Moon in this way, as they have an extensive backlog of Nakayoshi magazine, which conveniently and purposefully contains every act of Sailor Moon. I will have a link in the description, and they will be credited in the description of every single manga review. With all of that out of the way, I suppose we should jump straight into the analysis. Well, almost. As first, we're treated to this absolutely gorgeous opening 2-page spread, which is missing in the original Tankobon and altered in the remaster. But it's restored within the perfect, but it's lacking the text. I'm not gonna say that this spread is the reason I decided to go with the Nakayoshi run, but it was a big deciding factor. Just looking at the spread really makes me appreciate Naoko's earlier art style, and especially this early iteration of Sailor Moon, as about half the design quickly becomes altered by the end of the arc. Hell, it completely changes within this very act. But everything from the color of the gloves to the little boomerang decoration, we just never see Sailor Moon quite like this again. I quite like the cape even. And while I fully intend on giving the moon mask a proper send-off, it's going to be sticking around just a little while longer. So enjoy it while you can, those who even know it exists. I have always loved this image of Sailor Moon. It's almost uncanny valley to see this iteration of her in such detail. It's quite clearly Sailor Moon, but it's just different enough to be noticeably different. So much so that we never see this appearance again. But while I'm on the subject, I really love Naoko's artwork. And to me, it's always been her strongest skill as a mangaka. There's something about the dreamlike, soft, flowing, gentle colors, juxtaposed with the dark, imposing urban landscape that just draws me into this particular spread. Her artwork, most notably the hair, is always so ethereal. It's truly something that gives the manga a proper edge compared to other mediums. The text loosely translates to Sailor-suited action, the most talked about story of 1992 finally appears. Or something like that. My Japanese reading comprehension is abysmal. So, while I'll try to stay close to the source material, don't expect any language analysis unless it's plot relevant. Now, at the time, nobody really knew this series was going to go on to become a cultural phenomenon. But to say that no one knew this series would be successful is an even bigger lie. This series launched on the cover of the magazine. Naoko had already won an award for her previous work, and the anime series was already in development. This statement is one to entice readers into buying into the series, but does the first act fulfill on that initial promise? So, Act 1 is perhaps the most commonly retold and recreated within the entire franchise. If you've read, watched, or even played any adaptation of Sailor Moon, you've experienced Act 1 almost beat for beat. And of course this makes perfect sense, as it's the introduction to the series proper. But most importantly, it serves as our introduction to our protagonist, Usagi Tsukino, whose name roughly translates to Rabbit of the Moon. It's a reference to a Buddhist story about, well, a rabbit on the moon. Within the first 2 pages, and definitely within the rest of the act, we get a rather good handle on Usagi as a character. She's 14 and in middle school. She's lazy, clumsy, an underachiever, and a crybaby. She's really not your typical protagonist. Definitely not your typical protagonist for a Sentai story. And that's the entire point. Usagi simply lacks the qualities and grace of your typical shoujo lead, while also lacking the qualifications of a mass Sentai hero. I bring this up because it's easy to forget in retrospect, but this series was designed as a shoujo publication, and while the medium has evolved since the early 90s, Nakayoshi was just moving out of its first love story phase and expanding into new subgenres of teenage girl manga. This wasn't your typical outing for the magazine, and Usagi simply wasn't your typical protagonist. This act really likes to highlight Usagi's normal life, and while I'm gonna criticize aspects of that, please realize that I know why they're being shown. It's mostly here to help characterize Usagi or give plot-related exposition, but for the sake of brevity, don't get mad at me if I don't talk about Shingo. So, Usagi trips over a cat and removes the bandages on its forehead, where we see a visible moon mark, indicating this isn't your typical cat. However, Usagi is late to school, another trademark of her character, and the cat mystery is going to be put on hold for the moment. While at the school, not a lot actually happens apart from exposition. It's plot-essential exposition, but it's just handled in a poor way. At the school, we are immediately introduced to 3 new characters back to back, 2 of which have no significant relevance to the plot, and all 3 serve next to no importance within the grander scope of the narrative. Yes, Naru has importance within more than just this one showing, but within the entire arc, not so much. My issue isn't them existing, but merely the focus given to them as named characters, as within the same scene we're given 2 unimportant unnamed girls who have just as much function as Umino. Okay, one of them has a name. This one here is Yumiko. Are you happy? It's not like having secondary characters is a bad thing. But within the story's introduction, and within the first 20 pages, we're introduced to about 6 or 7 different characters. And that's even more if you count Sailor V. It's just, that's a lot of characters all at once. At the risk of sounding hypocritical to my review ethos, this overloading of characters becomes a recurring trend within this series. Sometimes to great effect, and other times, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Our next stop is the jewelry store that Naru's mother owns. They're currently in the middle of a giant sale, which serves 2 separate narrative threads. First, to introduce the motivation for the first arc's main antagonists, and second, to subtly introduce all the important parties to each other. A jewelry store happens to be the best place to introduce all these plot threads naturally, without having to think of some strange circumstance to place one of the characters in the other's way. As we'll soon learn, 2 of the parties are interested in something that may be contained within the store, and the store being owned by Naru's mother introduces Usagi into the plot. The store is seemingly under new nefarious management, as Naru's mother's internal line, "Yes, I need more youthful energy," tends to imply. So the audience is now aware of one of the key players, so let's set up the next. Usagi laments that she can't buy anything at the store due to her bad score on her test, limiting her allowance. So she proceeds to crumple up the test and toss it behind her, hitting a mysterious man in the face in the process. This leads to a bit of playful banter, which infuriates Usagi. The key to this scene, however, is the man name drops one of the most important items within the series. The Mabarashi no Ginsuishao, the illusory silver crystal. Get used to hearing that name, it's gonna come up a lot. So I really dislike doing a play-by-play of the manga. I find it isn't very conducive to the type of analysis I plan on doing with this series. However, this is an introductory arc, and as such, I feel it's important to get all these pieces in order. That being said, and I know I've already relayed how I feel about unnecessary characters, but Motoki is perhaps a bit different. Not narratively, he's completely useless, but I have some ideas about the character that I'll spare until my anime analysis. Just know that Usagi has a crush on him, and that's as far as any relevance he will play for the moment. The cat from earlier appears, and I'm just gonna skip the narrative pretense and simply refer to her as Luna from now on. Luna as a character is a fantastic addition to the story, and in my opinion, this is when the first act becomes actually enjoyable. Most of the character interaction has just been Usagi stuck within her own world. Now, something that would fit right in with the strange fantasies of our little rabbit suddenly becomes real. The fact that Luna is this magical, otherworldly talking cat who is not only supposed to be taken in complete earnestness, but is also the more serious character out of the duo never fails to get a laugh out of me. So Luna quickly explains the gist of the situation to Usagi. She is a soldier, not a guardian, that has a specific mission and an as of yet unnamed adversary. She is then given a brooch that, in conjunction with a certain phrase, unlocks a transformation to this alternate persona. Oh, come on, you all know the words. You're gonna make me embarrass myself. Alright. Moon Prism Power Makeup. And while Usagi doesn't know it yet, this is the first appearance of Sailor Moon within the confines of the story. And I gotta say, she's already looking different than the introductory image of her. But readers of Nakayoshi just a month earlier were treated to a completely different image of Sailor Moon, so changes were bound to happen. Although I really would have loved to have seen Deek's take on this incarnation of Sailor Moon. I mean, she's got a gun. The moon mask in this instance shows Naru in danger, so it's up to our newly suited sailor to spring into action. There's a few panels earlier that set up this scene that I didn't talk about in relation to the big jewelry store confrontation. Keep in mind that while we as readers know that there's 3 different parties involved, none of the characters do. Usagi now proudly introduces herself as the pretty soldier of love and justice, Sailor Moon, before it becomes apparent that a suit a soldier does not make, and Sailor Moon is woefully outside of her means of handling the situation. Sailor Moon is then attacked by the titular monster, or Yoma in this case, and her horde of zombie-like minions. This leads to Sailor Moon crying about the situation, which is enough to shatter the glass around her, and stop the advance of the monster, allowing her to use her first signature move, the Moon Frisbee. That's literally what it's called. Moon Tiara Action is an anime move, and Moon Tiara Boomerang is not the same thing. It was renamed to that later, but they're technically two separate moves. The Yoma is completely decimated by the frisbee, and a voice calls out from the shadows that although they did not find the illusory silver crystal, they found something else. They then introduce themselves as Tuxedo Kamin, or just Tuxedo Mask. Usagi is naturally completely smitten with him. Next time we will be covering a lot more ground as I dive into both Act 2 and 3. There's going to be a lot more material to cover with the introduction of 2 more Sailor Senshi, so I really hope to see you all there.